In the heart of a weathered neighborhood, where time seems to move more slowly, fate is about to orchestrate an extraordinary encounter. Tom Anderson, a 73-year-old retired teacher, lives alone in his modest home, his days marked by quiet routines and memories of happier times. But on one stormy night, a tiny mewing sound at his doorstep will change everything. What he doesn't know is that this shivering bundle of fur belongs to Claire Montgomery, a self-made tech billionaire whose wealth has brought her everything except what she truly seeks: genuine connection. As Tom tenderly nurses the sick kitten back to health, he's unaware that his simple acts of kindness are being desperately tracked by one of the most powerful women in the country. What unfolds next is a story that proves sometimes the richest. Connections in life come from the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through worn curtains as Tom Anderson followed his daily ritual, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, Sarah's favorite, the one with tiny painted daisies that had somehow survived 5 decades of use. The house creaked around him, its familiar sounds a constant reminder of how empty it had become since she passed 3 years ago. Tom shuffled to his small kitchen window, gazing out at the garden Sarah had loved so dearly. The roses needed pruning again. She would have reminded him twice by now, her gentle voice teasing him about his tendency to procrastinate on garden duties. The memory brought a slight smile to his lined face, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The stack of medical bills on his dining table caught his attention, their white edges harsh against the old wooden surface. Teaching had provided a decent pension, but the last years of Sarah's illness had depleted their savings. Now, each month became a careful dance of prioritizing expenses, medication over home repairs, utilities over new clothes. His arthritis. Medication often fell to the bottom of the list. He'd rather tend to the garden Sarah loved than ease the pain in his joints. In the corner of his living room, a wall of photographs told the story of 45 years of teaching at Roosevelt High. Young faces smiled back at him, generations of students whose lives he'd touched. Some still sent Christmas cards, their own children now older than their parents had been in those yellowing photographs. Last week, one of his former students, now a grandmother herself, had stopped him at the grocery store, insisting on paying for his modest purchases. The gesture had warmed his heart, but pricked at his pride. The neighborhood had changed around him, like a tide slowly reshaping a shoreline. The old Morrison place next door, where Jack and Betty had raised their 4 kids, was now home to a young couple who communicated through their phones even when sitting on their porch together. The corner store where he'd bought penny candies for Sarah's sweet tooth had transformed into a sleek coffee shop selling drinks with names he couldn't pronounce. His routine carried him through the quiet hours. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal with a sprinkle of cinnamon, just as Sarah had prepared it. The morning paper, delivered by Jimmy from 3 houses down, provided a window to a world that seemed to move faster every day. Tom took his time with each section, savoring the crossword puzzle that kept his mind sharp. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Sarah's parents, chimed 10 times. Tom reached for his gardening gloves, the leather worn soft from years of use. Outside, the autumn air carried a crisp warning of winter's approach. His joints protested as he knelt among the flower beds, but the soil between his fingers connected him to something greater than himself. Here, among the plants Sarah had tenderly cultivated, he felt closest to her. As the day wound down, Tom settled into his favorite armchair with a well-loved copy of Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. The television remained silent. He preferred the company of books to the constant noise of news channels. Through his living room window, he watched children return from school, their backpacks bouncing, their laughter carrying across perfectly manicured lawns. Once he would have known each child by name, would have taught their parents, but now they were strangers, hurrying past his house without a glance. The evening brought a simple dinner, soup warmed on the stovetop, crackers arranged carefully. On a plate Sarah had loved. He ate at the kitchen table, proper like Sarah had insisted upon, though he'd taken to talking to her empty chair. Sometimes he imagined her responses, her gentle teasing about his stubbornness, her pride in how he'd maintained her garden. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, Tom prepared for another night alone. His bedtime routine was unchanging: a warm wash of his face, careful brushing of his remaining teeth, a small pill for his heart. The bed felt too large, even after 3 years, but Sarah's pillow still held its place beside his. In the quiet darkness, Tom whispered his nightly prayer of gratitude for the life they'd shared, unaware that tomorrow would bring an unexpected visitor that would change everything. The storm rattled the windows of Tom's house with unprecedented fury. Rain pelted against the glass like tiny angry fists, while thunder rolled overhead in continuous waves. It was during a brief lull in nature's symphony that he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination. A weak, plaintive mewing carried through the howling wind. Tom opened his front door cautiously, shielding his face from the driving rain. There, huddled against his welcome mat, lay a tiny grey kitten no bigger than his palm. Its fur was matted and soaked, its body trembling violently. Without hesitation, Tom scooped up the fragile creature, cradling it against his worn sweater. Under the warm kitchen light, the kitten's condition became heartbreakingly clear. Its ribs showed through rain-slicked fur, and its eyes were crusted nearly shut. A delicate collar, incongruously expensive-looking against its bedraggled state, hung loose around its neck. Tom's attempts to read the tag proved futile. The engraving was too water-damaged to make out any information. "Well, little one," he murmured, wrapping the kitten in a soft towel. "Looks like you're staying with me tonight." The kitten's only response was a weak sneeze that shook its entire body. Drawing on decades-old memories of caring for Sarah's cats, Tom worked through the night. He warmed milk on the stove, adding a bit of water to make it easier on the kitten's stomach. Using an eyedropper from his medicine cabinet, he carefully fed the tiny creature, drop by precious drop. Every successful swallow felt like a victory. Each hour brought new challenges. The kitten's fever sparked worry lines across Tom's forehead as he remembered his limited budget. Yet watching the small chest rise and fall with labored breath, he knew he'd spend his last dollar if needed. He fashioned a bed from an old shoebox and his softest handkerchief, placing it near the radiator for warmth. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Tom whispered as dawn approached, noticing how the kitten had curled its paw around his finger while sleeping, just like Sarah was. The name came to him naturally then. Hope. Whether it was hope for the kitten's survival or for something else, he wasn't quite sure. The next few days fell into an exhausting but rewarding routine. Tom set his alarm clock for every 2 hours, faithfully rising to check on Hope and offer food or medicine. He boiled chicken to make broth, creating a calendar on his kitchen wall to track feeding times and symptoms. The local veterinary clinic's number went on speed dial on his ancient cordless phone. Hope's transformation, though gradual, amazed him. Each day brought small victories. The first time she lapped milk from a saucer on her own. The morning she batted at a piece of string with unexpected energy. The afternoon she managed to climb onto his lap without help. Her eyes, now clear and bright, followed him everywhere he went in the house. Tom found himself talking to Hope constantly, telling her about Sarah, about his teaching days, about the garden outside. The kitten would tilt her head, grey ears perked forward, as if understanding every word. During their late-night feeding sessions, he shared secrets he hadn't voiced in years. "Sarah would have loved you," he told Hope one evening, watching her chase a dust mote in a shaft of sunset light. "She always said animals know good souls when they meet them." The kitten paused her play to look at him, then trotted over to headbutt his ankle affectionately. What Tom didn't realize was that every can of special food he bought, every dollar spent on medicine and supplies, came at the cost of his own needs. His arthritis medication remained unpurchased. His grocery list grew shorter, but watching hope grow stronger made it all worthwhile. The small creature had brought something precious back into his life, a reason to wake up excited each morning. A being that needed him completely. As Hope's health improved, her personality blossomed. She proved to be a gentle soul with an adventurous streak, exploring every corner of the house, but always returning to curl up on Tom's lap during his evening reading. Her purrs filled the silence that had haunted his home for so long, and her playful antics brought laughter back into rooms that had forgotten the sound. 60 floors above the city, Claire Montgomery stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, her reflection ghosted against the glittering skyline below. The tech empire she'd built from her college dorm room sprawled across 3 continents, yet right now, all she cared about was finding one tiny grey kitten. Miss Montgomery, her assistant James, cleared his throat from the doorway. "The board is waiting in the conference room." Claire didn't turn. "Any news?" "The search teams have expanded to 3 more neighborhoods. We've increased the reward to $100,000, and the social media campaign has gone viral." James paused, tablet clutched to his chest. But no confirmed sightings of Luna yet. The name caught in Claire's throat. Luna, named for the crescent-shaped white patch on her chest, had been more than just a pet. In a world where every relationship came with strategic implications and hidden agendas, Luna's unconditional affection had been her anchor to reality. "Postpone the board meeting," Claire said, finally turning from the window. Her Louboutin heels clicked against marble as she crossed to her desk. "Tell them I'm dealing with a personal emergency, but the Singapore merger can wait." Her tone left no room for argument. "Double the reward and get me the latest search grid." Alone again, Claire sank into her ergonomic chair, her fingers finding the small cat toy hidden in her desk drawer. The jingling bell inside had driven her crazy during video calls, but now she'd give anything to hear that sound again. The wall of monitors before her displayed an array of missing pet posts, security camera feeds, and social media mentions. Her tech company's advanced AI algorithms scanned every photo upload in the city, searching for any glimpse of a grey kitten matching Luna's description. The irony wasn't lost on her. Billions in technology deployed to find one small cat, her. Phone buzzed with another message from her mother. "Darling, just buy another cat." That's what normal people do. But Claire wasn't normal people, and Luna wasn't just another cat. She'd found the kitten in the rain behind her office building 6 months ago, a tiny thing with eyes too big for its face. In Luna's presence, Claire could just be herself. Not the tech mogul, not the billionaire, not the woman whose dating life made tabloid headlines. Sleep had become a luxury since Luna's disappearance. Claire's nights were spent poring over search reports and surveillance footage. Her normally immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain, a slightly crooked seam, a strand of dark hair escaping its perfect twist. "James," she called, out, knowing he never strayed far. "Get me the list of veterinary clinics again. All of them, not just the luxury pet hospitals." Her assistant appeared with practiced efficiency. "You've already personally called 300 clinics." "Then I'll call 300 more." Claire pulled up the list on her tablet, her manicured fingers scrolling through names. Someone, somewhere, has to have seen her. The city stretched out below her office, a maze of possibilities and dead ends. Somewhere in those streets, Luna was either lost and afraid or, Claire had to believe, being cared for by someone kind. The thought of her kitten, hungry or cold, kept her awake at night, haunting her dreams when exhaustion finally claimed her. A notification popped up on her screen. Another false lead. Another grey kitten that wasn't Luna. Claire's shoulders sagged slightly before she caught herself. Weakness wasn't an option. She hadn't built an empire by giving up when things got difficult. "James," she called again. "Contact every animal shelter within a 100-mile radius. I want daily updates on all incoming strays. And set up a meeting. With our PR team, We need to expand the social media campaign." As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across her office, Claire remained at her desk. On one screen, lines of code scrolled past as her company's servers processed millions of images. On another, a slideshow played. Luna curled. Up on Claire's laptop, Luna playing with a designer cat toy, Luna sleeping on Claire's pillow. "Where are you, little one?" Claire whispered to the empty room. "What kind of person has found you? Are they taking care of you the way you deserve?" She couldn't know that miles away, in a modest house with a well-tended garden, her beloved kitten was curled up in an old man's lap, both of them healing each other in ways money could never buy. 2 weeks into Hope's recovery, Tom woke to an unfamiliar sound, purring. The tiny kitten had climbed from her shoebox bed onto his pillow, her body vibrating with contentment as she kneaded his silver hair. For the first time in years, Tom found himself laughing out loud, the sound echoing through rooms that had held too much silence. "Well, look who's feeling better," he chuckled, carefully sitting up to avoid disturbing his small companion. Hope responded by scaling his shoulder, perching there like a furry parrot as he made his way to the kitchen. The transformation in her was remarkable. Her fur now gleamed with health, her eyes bright and alert, her movements full of kitten energy. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window caught something that made Tom pause. Around Hope's neck, the expensive collar he'd nearly forgotten about glinted. Now clean and dry, its quality was unmistakable. Platinum or white gold, he guessed, with tiny embedded stones that might be diamonds. It seemed absurdly luxurious for a cat, yet somehow significant. A knock at the door interrupted his examination. It was Mrs. Chen from next door, her 7-year-old granddaughter Amy in tow. Word of Tom's rescue of the sick kitten had spread through the neighborhood, drawing visitors bearing cat food, toys, and well-wishes. "Mr. Anderson," Amy squealed, spotting Hope on Tom's shoulder. "Can I play with her, please?" Tom smiled, remembering. Similar enthusiasm from his former students. "If she's willing, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about. Let her come to you." Amy sat cross-legged on the living room floor, holding out a feather toy her grandmother had brought. Hope, displaying her newfound confidence, bounded down Tom's arm and across the room, pouncing on the toy with precise aim. "She's so much better," Mrs. Chen exclaimed, watching the playful scene. "Dr. Martinez at the clinic said it was touch." "And go that first night?" Tom nodded, recalling the late-night visit to the veterinary clinic. He'd used his emergency credit card, the one he kept for absolute necessities, when he'd seen Hope's fever spiking. Dr. Martinez had treated the kitten for free after hearing Tom's story, only charging for the medications. The whole neighborhood's talking about it, Mrs. Chen continued, her eyes twinkling. "How you saved her life. Even my teenage grandson put down his phone to ask about the kitten." As if knowing she was the topic of conversation, Hope pranced over to rub against Tom's ankles. The collar caught Mrs. Chen's attention, her eyes widening slightly. "That's quite a fancy collar," she observed. "Have you tried finding the owner?" Tom sighed. "The tag was damaged in the storm. I've asked around, but no one's missing a kitten in the immediate area." The truth was, part of him dreaded the idea of finding Hope's original owner. She had become more than just a rescued kitten. She was his reason to get up early, to keep to a schedule, to engage with the world again. Even his garden had benefited from his renewed energy, with Hope supervising his work from various sunny spots. Later that afternoon, Dr. Martinez stopped by for a follow-up check. The young vet's face lit up at Hope's enthusiastic greeting. "This is incredible," she said, examining the kitten. "Her blood work is perfect, weight gain right on track. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Anderson, keep it up." She paused, stroking Hope's chin. "Though I have to ask, have you seen this collar before? It looks like it could be worth more than my car." Tom shook his head. "She was wearing it when I found her. I've been meaning to have someone look at it, but you're worried about finding her owner." Dr. Martinez finished gently. "I understand. She's been good for you. Anyone can see." That, as the vet packed up her supplies, Hope demonstrated her latest trick, retrieving her toy mouse and dropping it in Tom's lap. The small act drew delighted laughter from both humans. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Martinez said at the door, "sometimes the best medicine isn't the kind that comes in bottles. Whatever happens, you've given this kitten a second chance at life. And maybe she's returned the favor." Tom watched Hope chasing a sunbeam across his living room floor, her silver collar catching the light. Something told him that his quiet life was about to change. He just didn't know how dramatically yet. Claire stood in her command center, surrounded by screens displaying data from her month-long search. Her normally pristine conference room had transformed into a war room, with maps covering the walls and pins marking every potential sighting. Of Luna, James hovered nearby, monitoring incoming reports from their expanded search team. "Miss Montgomery," he said, tablet in hand, "we've got something." He pulled up a security camera feed on the main screen. "This footage is from 3 weeks ago, the night of the storm. It shows a grey kitten matching Luna's description in the Oak Grove neighborhood." Claire leaned forward, her heart racing as she watched the grainy footage. The small figure darting through the rain certainly moved like Luna. The timestamp matched the night of her disappearance. "Cross-reference with local veterinary records," she commanded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Any grey kittens treated in that area within 48 hours of the storm." The AI algorithm she'd personally coded began processing data. A notification pinged. Dr. Martinez's small animal clinic had treated a grey kitten with an expensive collar for fever and exposure. The night of the storm. "Got you," Claire whispered, relief flooding her system. "James, get me everything on this clinic, and I mean everything." The social media campaign had also started bearing fruit. A local neighborhood group had posted about an elderly man who'd rescued a sick kitten. The comments were filled with praise for his kindness and mentions of an unusual collar. Claire's team worked through the night, piecing together the puzzle. The clinic's records were protected, but her tech skills made short work of that obstacle. The kitten had been brought in by a Thomas Anderson, 73, retired teacher. Address, 147, Maple Street, Oak Grove. "Pull up everything we have on him," Claire instructed, her voice tight with anticipation. Background checks, property records, and social media mentions flooded the screens. A picture emerged of a widower, retired from Roosevelt High School after 45 years of teaching, living alone in a modest house with a well-maintained garden. The satellite view of his property showed neat flower beds and a small vegetable garden. Recent photos from neighbors' social media posts captured glimpses of a grey kitten in his window. One image made Claire gasp. Luna's distinctive crescent marking was clearly visible. "James, cancel my meetings for the next week," she said, studying Tom Anderson's kind face in his teaching photo. "And get me everything you can on the neighborhood. I need to handle this personally." "Handle it personally?" James looked concerned. "The legal team could—" "No." Claire's tone was firm. "This man saved Luna's life. He deserves more than lawyers showing up at his door." She paused, considering. "Besides, something about this feels important." As her team dispersed to make arrangements, Claire remained in the conference room, looking at the photos of Tom Anderson's house. Simple, weathered, loved, everything her sleek penthouse wasn't. Luna had chosen to trust this man, and Claire had learned to trust her kitten's judgment of character. "Prepare the car for tomorrow morning," she told James. And James, no security detail, no assistance, just me. For the first time in weeks, Claire slept soundly, knowing Luna was safe. She dreamed of a garden full of flowers and the wisdom in an old teacher's eyes. Dawn painted Tom's garden in soft gold as he sipped his morning coffee, watching Hope stalk a butterfly through Sarah's rose bushes. The kitten had developed a morning routine of her own. Wake Tom with gentle paw taps at sunrise. Supervise his coffee preparation from her perch on the kitchen counter, then accompany him on his garden rounds. "Careful of the thorns, little one," he called out as Hope wove between the rose stems. She paused to give him what he'd come to recognize as her "I know what I'm doing" look before continuing her pursuit. Her confidence had grown along with her strength. Though she never strayed far from Tom's side, the garden had flourished under their joint care. Hope seemed to understand the importance of these morning rituals, sitting attentively as Tom spoke to each plant, sharing Sarah's gardening wisdom with his furry apprentice. When he knelt to pull weeds, she would pat at the dirt beside him, mimicking his movements in her own way. "Sarah would say we're quite the pair," Tom mused, watching Hope investigate a freshly watered marigold. The kitten's presence had brought life back to more than just the garden. Neighbors who had previously hurried past now stopped to chat, drawn by Hope's playful antics and Tom's renewed vitality. Inside, their daily dance continued. Hope had claimed various spots throughout the house: a sunny windowsill in the living room, a corner of Tom's reading chair, a soft cushion he'd placed on his desk specifically for her. She followed him from room to room, her bell tinkling. Gently, the diamonds on her collar catching light and sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. Tom had taken to preparing their meals together, telling Hope stories as he cooked. "You see, when I first met Sarah," he'd say, measuring out Hope's special food into her bowl, "she was wearing a yellow dress that matched the daffodils in her mother's garden." Hope would listen intently, waiting until he finished each tale. Before starting her meal, the financial strain of caring for Hope meant creative budgeting. Tom had started growing more vegetables in the garden to save on groceries, and he'd learned to mend his clothes rather than replace them. The arthritis in his hands made sewing difficult, but watching Hope play with the expensive toys brought by well-meaning neighbors reminded him that the best things in life weren't always store-bought. Their afternoons often found them in Tom's reading chair. Hope curled in his lap as he read aloud from his favorite books. She showed a particular interest in The Old Man and the Sea, her ears perking up at Hemingway's descriptions of the ocean. Tom would stroke her fur, his voice growing soft as he shared passages that reminded him of his own life's journey. "You know, Hope," he said one afternoon, marking his place in the book, "I used to worry about leaving a legacy. 45 years of teaching, and sometimes I wondered if it was enough." He scratched behind her ears, smiling as she leaned into his touch. "But you've taught me that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest impact." Even his dreams had changed since Hope's arrival. Instead of the lonely echoes of an empty house, his nights were filled with the soft sound of her purring. When his arthritis pain kept him awake, she seemed to sense his discomfort, pressing close and offering her own kind of comfort. The neighborhood children had taken to visiting after school, sitting cross-legged on Tom's porch as Hope performed her growing repertoire of tricks. She would fetch small toys, roll over for belly rubs, and even give high fives with her tiny paw. Tom found himself teaching again, showing the children how to be gentle with animals, how to earn trust through patience and kindness. "My grandson says you're the cat whisperer," Mrs. Chen told him one evening, watching Hope help Tom inspect the tomato plants. "He's not wrong, you know. That little cat has brought out something special in you, Tom." Looking at Hope, her silver-grey fur glowing in the evening light, Tom couldn't disagree. Each day brought new small joys, new reasons to smile, new moments of grace. What he didn't know was that their peaceful routine was about to be beautifully disrupted by a visitor who would change both their lives forever. Claire stood in her walk-in closet, larger than most apartments, staring at rows of designer clothing. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain about her appearance. The power suits and stilettos that commanded boardrooms suddenly seemed inappropriate for meeting a retired teacher who had saved her beloved kitten. "James," she called, "what do normal people wear?" Her assistant appeared in the doorway, barely concealing his amusement at her distress. "Perhaps something less intimidating," he suggested, gesturing to her casual wear section. All still. Designer brands, but less obviously so. Claire selected a simple blue sweater and dark jeans, items she usually reserved for rare weekends off. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The Singapore merger was entering a critical phase. The board was demanding answers about her absence, and tech blogs were speculating about her unusual behavior. Claire ignored them all, focused on a single photo on her phone. Luna, as a tiny kitten curled up in her hand. The board meeting started 10 minutes ago, James reminded her gently. On her tablet, angry emails from shareholders piled up. The company's stock had dipped 2 points since rumors of her distraction began circulating. Send them the quarterly projections, Claire said, applying minimal makeup, and remind them that I own 51% of the company. She paused, studying her reflection. Do I look approachable? James chose his words carefully. You look less like you're about to acquire a small country. Moving to her home office, Claire reviewed the dossier on Thomas Anderson one more time. His teaching career was impressive. Dozens of awards, letters from former students, news clippings about his innovative teaching methods. His late wife, Sarah, had been his high school sweetheart. Their marriage had lasted 45 years until her death 3 years ago. Recent surveillance photos showed him in his garden, Luna, or Hope, as he'd named her, following him like a tiny shadow. The sight made Claire's throat tight. Her Kitten looked healthy, happy, loved. The practical part of her brain, the part that had built a tech empire, suggested simply sending a legal team with compensation. But something deeper told her this situation required a personal touch. The media team is concerned, James said, appearing with her afternoon green tea. There are rumors about your emotional stability. The tech blogs are running stories about the billionaire who lost her cat. Claire sipped her tea, watching another video clip of Tom and Luna in the garden. Let them talk. Some things are more important than stock prices. Her tablet chimed, with a message from her mother. Darling, this obsession with a cat is beneath you. The Astor's son is in town. Why don't we arrange dinner? Claire deleted it without responding. The truth was, Luna's disappearance had forced her to confront uncomfortable realities about her life. Her penthouse, with its minimalist design and smart technology, had felt emptier than ever without the Kitten's presence. Her relationships, carefully curated for business advantage, provided no real comfort during her search. Standing at her window, Claire watched the sunset paint the city skyline. Tomorrow, she would drive to Oak Grove, to a modest house with a well-tended garden. She would meet a man who had given her kitten love and care without expecting anything in return. The thought both terrified and intrigued her. James, she said, quietly, cancel my appointments for the next 2 weeks. Her assistant nearly dropped his tablet. 2 weeks? But the Silicon Valley conference can wait. Claire turned from the window. Decision made. Sometimes you have to step away from one world to understand another. That night, sleep eluded her. She found herself studying photos of Tom's neighborhood, so different from her luxury high-rise. Gardens instead of doormen, children playing on sidewalks instead of security cameras. A community that had rallied around an old man and a sick kitten. As dawn approached, Claire realized she was nervous, not an emotion she often experienced. Tomorrow would bring a collision of worlds, her life of power and privilege meeting one of simple kindness and quiet dignity. What she didn't know was that this meeting would change far more than just Luna's living arrangements. Claire's Tesla rolled silently through the Oak Grove neighborhood, drawing curious glances from morning joggers and dog walkers. She had insisted on driving herself, leaving her usual security detail behind. The tree-lined streets with their modest homes felt like a different world from her sleek downtown domain. Her GPS directed her to park a block away from Tom's house. Heart pounding unexpectedly, Claire found herself walking past blooming front yards and children's bicycles propped against porches. The normality of it all felt almost exotic to her. Then she saw them, In a well-tended garden, an elderly man knelt among rose bushes, his movements careful but purposeful. And there, perched on a nearby garden bench, was Luna, her Luna, watching him with obvious adoration. The kitten's fur gleamed in the morning sun, her collar catching the light as she tilted her head to follow Tom's movements. Claire pressed herself behind a large oak tree, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before her. Tom was talking to Luna, his voice carrying softly across the garden. "These were Sarah's favorite roses," he was saying. "She always said they bloomed better if you talked to them." Luna responded with a chirping meow, hopping down to pat at the soil near his hand. The interaction made Claire's throat tight. In all her planning, she hadn't prepared for this. The obvious bond between them, the peaceful contentment they shared. Luna had never looked so at home. A neighborhood child rode past on a scooter, calling out, "Morning, Mr. Anderson!" "Hi, Hope!" Tom waved back, and Luna, Hope, pranced to the garden fence to receive a gentle pat from the child. The casual interaction spoke volumes about their integration into this community. Claire watched as Tom struggled slightly to stand, his joints clearly stiff. Without hesitation, Luna rushed to his side, weaving between his legs as if offering support. The old teacher smiled down at her, murmuring something that made the kitten's tail curl with pleasure. Moving closer, Claire could see the details her surveillance photos had missed. The garden tools showing years of use, the worn but carefully maintained clothing Tom wore, the small bowl of water thoughtfully placed in the shade for Luna. Everything spoke of care, consideration, and love, offered freely without expectation of return. Tom made his way to a wooden bench, Luna following faithfully. From her hidden vantage point, Claire observed their morning routine. The kitten curled in his lap as he opened a well-worn book, his weathered hands gentle as he stroked her fur. Luna's purrs were audible even from Claire's position. A neighbor emerged from the house next door, an elderly Asian woman carrying what appeared to be a container of food. "Tom," she called out, "I made too much breakfast. Again." The knowing smile they shared suggested this was a regular occurrence. "Mrs. Chen, you're too kind," Tom replied, carefully setting Luna down to accept the container. "Would you like some?" "Fresh tomatoes in return. They're coming in nicely now." Claire watched the easy exchange, noting how Luna greeted Mrs. Chen with familiar affection. This wasn't just a man who had found her cat. This was someone who had created a real home for her, complete with an extended family of neighbors who looked out for both of them. The tech mogul found herself sinking onto a nearby park bench, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Her hand went to her phone, where dozens of urgent messages waited for her attention. The corporate world seemed very far away from this peaceful garden scene. Through the leaves, she continued to observe. Tom had returned to his bench, sharing bits of his breakfast with Luna while reading aloud to her. The kitten's attention never wavered from his face. Her tail curled contentedly around her paws. "What am I supposed to do?" Claire whispered to herself, watching Luna bat playfully at Tom's bookmark. The legal documents in her car, prepared by her attorneys to reclaim her pet, suddenly seemed cold and inadequate. A child's voice rang out from down the street. "Mom, can we visit Mr. Anderson?" "And Hope after school. He said he'd show us how to plant sunflowers." Claire's carefully planned confrontation crumbled further. She had come expecting to find her cat being cared for by a kind stranger. Instead, she had discovered Luna, Hope, was at the center of a web of relationships, bringing joy not just to one lonely man, but to an entire community. As the morning sun climbed higher, Claire made a decision. Standing slowly, she brushed off her designer jeans and took a deep breath. She would not approach them today. First, she needed to rethink everything, not as a billionaire reclaiming property, but as someone who had unknowingly set in motion a story of transformation and connection. The next morning, Claire parked her Tesla directly in front of Tom's house. She had exchanged her usual designer wardrobe for simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the path, to his front door, past beds of cheerful marigolds and late-blooming roses. Before she could knock, a familiar meow caught her attention. Luna Hope was perched in the front window, watching her with curious eyes. Claire's heart lurched at the sight of her beloved kitten, but something stopped her from calling out the name Luna. The door opened, revealing Tom Anderson. Up close, his kind face showed every year of his 73 years, but his eyes sparkled with vitality. "Can I help you?" he asked, as Hope wound herself around his ankles. "Mr. Anderson," Claire began, her rehearsed speech suddenly forgotten. I heard about how you rescued a kitten during the storm last month." Tom's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Ah, you must be one of Hope's admirers from the neighborhood. Please come in. She loves meeting new friends." Claire stepped into a home that felt worlds away from her penthouse. Worn but well-loved furniture, shelves lined with books, and photographs covering the walls created an atmosphere of comfortable history. Hope trotted over to investigate the visitor, her head tilted in curious recognition. "Would you like some tea?" Tom offered, gesturing to an armchair. "Hope and I were just about to have our morning break." The kitten, hearing her name, chirped and headed toward the kitchen. "Tea would be lovely," Claire replied, watching as Hope disappeared around the corner. The kitten's confident movements through the house spoke volumes about how at home she felt here. Tom busied himself in the kitchen, while Claire took in her surroundings. A teacher's salary hadn't afforded luxury, but every item seemed to hold meaning. Photos of a beautiful woman, Sarah she presumed, smiled from various frames. One showed the couple in their youth, the woman holding a cat and laughing at the camera. "Sarah always loved cats," Tom said, following her gaze as he returned with a tea tray. "She would have adored Hope." The kitten in question jumped onto the arm of his chair, settling into what was clearly a familiar spot. Claire accepted a cup of tea, noting the slight tremor in Tom's hands as he poured. "The whole neighborhood talks about how you saved her," she said softly. "Oh, she saved me just as much," Tom replied, absently stroking Hope's fur. "Gave me a reason to get up in the morning again, to tend the garden, to be part of things." The kitten purred loudly, as if agreeing. Watching them together, Claire felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. In all her scenarios for this meeting, she hadn't planned for the depth of connection she was witnessing. Hope's eyes, fixed adoringly on Tom's face, showed the same trust and love she had once given only to Claire. "She's quite special," Claire managed, her voice slightly hoarse. "That collar she's wearing," Tom's face clouded slightly. "Yes, I've been meaning to have someone look at it. It's clearly valuable. I've worried her owner might be searching for her." The moment had come. Claire could reveal herself, present, her evidence, reclaim her pet. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm sure if her owner knew she was being cared for so well, they would be grateful." Hope chose that moment to leap gracefully into Claire's lap, kneading her expensive jeans with familiar affection. The gesture brought unexpected tears to Claire's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "Are you all right, dear?" Tom asked, his teacher's instinct for distress evident. "Yes, I just—" Claire stroked Hope's fur, feeling the familiar vibration of her purr. "She reminds me of a cat I once had." Tom nodded understandingly. "They have a way of finding the soft spots in our hearts, don't they?" He smiled as Hope returned to his side, her loyalty clear. "Would you like to stay for lunch? Hope enjoys company and I made extra soup." Looking at them, the retired teacher and the cat who had brought him back to life, Claire made her second unexpected decision of the day. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Anderson." "Tom, please," he corrected gently. "Any friend of Hope's is a friend of mine." As she helped him carry plates to the small dining table, Claire realized she had entered his house as Luna's owner, but would leave as something else entirely. A witness to the kind of love that couldn't be bought, only given freely. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire found herself drawn back to Tom's house nearly every day. She told her office she was working remotely on a special project, which wasn't entirely untrue. What had begun as a simple lunch had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Each visit revealed new layers to their unlikely friendship. Claire discovered that Tom was an excellent storyteller, his years of teaching having honed his ability to make any topic fascinating. He shared tales of his teaching days, of Sarah's garden victories and defeats, and of Hope's daily adventures. The kitten would often punctuate his stories with perfectly timed meows, as if adding her own commentary. Sarah always said, "A garden needs 3 things," Tom explained one afternoon as they planted new bulbs together. "Good soil, regular care, and someone to share it with." Hope supervised their work from a sunny patch nearby, occasionally batting at the trowel when Claire dug too deep. Claire found herself sharing too, though carefully edited versions of her life. She told him about growing up with a silver spoon that felt more like a burden, about building something of her own, despite her family's disapproval. Tom listened with the same attention he gave to Hope's purrs, offering gentle insights that made Claire see her own life differently. Their meals together became a regular occurrence. Claire was surprised to discover she preferred Tom's simple, home-cooked dishes to the Michelin-starred restaurants she usually frequented. She learned to shell peas at his kitchen table, Hope helping by chasing any that rolled away. "You're good with her," Tom observed one day as Claire dangled a string for Hope to chase. "Most people try to force affection, but you understand her. Need to come to you on her own terms." The comment hit closer to home than Tom could know. Claire watched as Hope bounded back to him, claiming her usual spot on his lap. The kitten had maintained a perfect balance between them, showing affection to Claire while keeping Tom as her clear favorite. Tom's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, began including Claire in her accidental extra portions of food the older woman gave her, knowing looks that suggested she saw more than Claire was ready to acknowledge, even to herself. "You know," Mrs. Chen said one evening, catching Claire alone on the porch, "some people spend their whole lives looking for what they already have." She nodded toward the living room window, where Tom could be seen reading to Hope in his favorite chair. Claire's corporate world seemed increasingly distant. She handled necessary calls and emails from her car or during quick trips back to the penthouse, but found herself rushing to return to the peaceful atmosphere of Tom's home. Hope would greet her at the door now, chirping excitedly as if she'd been expecting her. The garden flourished under their combined care. Claire's tech-savvy research complemented Tom's years of experience, leading to experiments with new varieties. Of flowers, Hope investigated each addition to her domain thoroughly, giving special attention to the catnip Claire had suggested planting. "Sarah would have liked you," Tom said one evening as they watched the sunset from his porch. Hope was draped across both their laps, a paw touching each of them. She always said the best people were those who could appreciate simple moments. Claire looked down at her now dirty jeans, remembering how she'd once spent hours choosing the perfect designer outfit. Here, with soil under her nails and Hope's fur on her clothes, she felt more genuine than she had in years. But beneath their growing friendship lay an unspoken truth. Each time Hope's collar caught the light, Claire felt a twinge of guilt. Each story Tom shared about the kitten's impact on his life made her secret harder to bear. She found herself lying awake at night, wrestling with questions of right and wrong, ownership and belonging, love and letting go. What neither of them realized was that Hope, in her feline wisdom, had already decided how this story would end. She had recognized something in both of them, a loneliness, a need, a capacity for love that was just waiting for the right moment to bloom. The morning paper lay unopened on Tom's kitchen table, but its headline was impossible to miss. Tech billionaire Claire Montgomery's strange disappearance. Sources say she's living double life in suburbs. Below was a grainy photo of Claire, helping Tom in his garden, Hope visible in the background. Claire's phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn. James's increasingly urgent messages warned of reporters heading to Oak Grove. She sat in her car around the corner from Tom's house, her hands shaking as she tried to figure out how to handle this moment. The decision was made for her when a News van pulled up in front of Tom's home. She watched in horror as reporters approached his door, cameras ready. Without thinking, she rushed from her car. "Mr. Anderson!" a reporter called out as Tom opened his door. "Can you comment on your relationship with Claire Montgomery? Is it true she's been hiding here?" Tom stood in his doorway, confusion evident on his face. Hope peeked around his legs. Her tail puffed, up at the commotion. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake," he began. "There's no mistake," Claire's voice rang out as she pushed through the small crowd. "But this is private property, and you're trespassing." She moved to stand beside Tom, her corporate authority voice in full effect. "My legal team will be in touch with your networks if you don't leave immediately." The reporters backed away, though their cameras continued rolling. Tom looked at Claire, recognition and understanding slowly dawning in his eyes. Hope meowed softly, pressing against both their legs. "Perhaps we should go inside," Tom said quietly, his teacher's composure showing even in this bizarre moment. Claire nodded, following him into the familiar living room that now felt different somehow. "I'm so sorry, Tom," she began as soon as the door closed. "I should have told you that you're Claire Montgomery, the tech pioneer." Tom settled into his chair, Hope jumping immediately into his lap. "That this is Luna, your missing cat." Claire sank onto the couch, her carefully constructed world collapsing. "How long have you known about you?" "Mrs. Chen's grandson showed me an article last week about the billionaire searching for her cat. The pictures made it clear who you were." He stroked Hope's fur thoughtfully. "As for Luna being yours, I suspected from the start. That collar isn't exactly standard issue. Why didn't you say anything?" Tom's eyes were kind but serious. "I was waiting for you to trust me with the truth." Outside, they could hear reporters gathering. Hope, or Luna, moved from Tom's lap to Claire's, then back again, as if trying to maintain a connection between them. "I came here planning to take her back," Claire admitted, tears threatening. "But then I saw how she was with you, how you were with her. I couldn't bear to destroy that." And somewhere along the way it became about more than just the cat, didn't it? Tom's question was gentle but direct. Claire looked around the room that had become more home to her than her penthouse ever had. "This place, these weeks with you and Hope, I've never felt more real, more myself." "Hope," Tom repeated softly. "Even knowing she was Luna, you kept calling her Hope, because that's who she became with you, just like I became someone different. Here too." Claire wiped her eyes. "But now everyone knows, and the media won't leave you alone, and I've ruined everything." Tom was quiet for a moment, watching Hope wash her paw with dedicated focus. "Sarah used to say that truth, even late-coming truth, is better than comfortable lies." He looked at Claire. "The question is, what happens now?" Before Claire could answer, Hope jumped down and padded to the window, her tail twitching at the sight of reporters on the lawn. The morning sun caught her collar, sending rainbow reflections dancing across the walls, a reminder of the two worlds that had collided in this modest living room. "I don't know," Claire admitted, watching their little cat survey her domain. "But I do know I don't want to lose this, any of this." Tom's expression softened. "Then perhaps we should figure it out together." Hope returned to sit between them, her presence a bridge across the gulf of revelations. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, but inside this room, three hearts beat in uncertain synchronization, waiting to see what truth and trust would build from here. The media storm that followed Claire's revelation brought unexpected consequences. Reporters camped outside Tom's house, hoping to catch the unlikely pair together. Social media exploded with theories about their relationship, ranging from romantic speculation to conspiracy theories about corporate schemes. But it was Hope who first noticed something was wrong with Tom. The kitten became unusually clingy, refusing to leave his side even for meals. She would paw at his chest when he experienced shortness of breath, which he dismissed as simply feeling his age. Claire noticed too. Tom's hands shook more than usual while gardening, and he tired easily during their daily activities. When she suggested seeing a doctor, he brushed it off with a gentle smile. "Just the excitement of becoming a local celebrity," he joked. The morning everything changed started normally enough. Claire arrived early, bringing breakfast from Mrs. Chen. She found Tom in his chair, Hope frantically pawing at his leg, meowing in distress. His face was ashen, his breathing labored. "Tom," Claire rushed to his side. "Tom, what's wrong?" "Just a little tired," he managed, but his words slurred slightly. Hope's cries grew more urgent. Claire's corporate decisiveness took over. "I'm calling an ambulance." Before Tom could protest, she had her phone out. "And don't argue with me about the cost." The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they loaded Tom into the ambulance, Hope tried desperately to follow, her distress evident. Claire scooped her up, whispering reassurances to both the cat and herself as she followed the ambulance in her car. The emergency room was a blur of activity. Claire's name opened doors that would have remained closed to others, but even her influence couldn't speed up medical tests. She sat in the waiting room, Hope hidden in her designer bag against hospital regulations, both of them watching the clock with mounting anxiety. When the doctor finally appeared, his expression made Claire's heart sink. "Mr. Anderson has been experiencing symptoms for quite some time," he began carefully. "The chest pains, the fatigue—" "Why didn't he say anything?" Claire interrupted, though she already knew the answer. The stack of unpaid medical bills on Tom's table flashed through her mind. Many patients, especially older ones, ignore warning signs when they're worried about medical costs, the doctor explained. "Mr. Anderson has a serious heart condition that requires immediate intervention. Without surgery—" Hope mewed softly from Claire's bag, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Claire stroked her head absently, her mind racing. "Schedule the surgery," she said firmly. "Whatever he needs. I'm covering all costs." The doctor nodded, but his expression remained serious. "There's more. While running tests, we found other issues. His arthritis medication. Has he been taking it regularly?" Claire remembered Tom's careful budgeting, the way he winced when gardening but never complained. "No," she whispered. "He's been choosing Hope's care over his own." When she was finally allowed to see him, Tom looked small in the hospital bed. Hope immediately wiggled free from Claire's bag and curled up carefully beside him, her purr loud. "In the quiet room. You shouldn't have ignored this," Claire said, taking his hand. "You should have told me." Tom's smile was weak but warm. "And have you worry? You had enough on your plate with the media circus." "I'm a billionaire, Tom. Medical bills aren't exactly a concern for me. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you." His voice was soft but firm. "I've spent my life standing on my own 2 feet. Asking for help, it isn't easy." Hope stretched out between them, one paw on Tom's arm, the other reaching for Claire. The gesture wasn't lost on either of them. "When Sarah got sick," Tom continued, "we spent everything we had, every savings, every pension dollar. She made me promise to take care of myself after she was gone, but then Hope came along." He looked at the kitten with tears in his eyes. "How could I choose my own comfort over her needs?" Claire felt tears streaming down her own face. "And how do you think Hope would feel if she lost you? How do you think I would feel?" The words surprised them both. The monitors beeped steadily as silence filled the room. Outside they could hear the hospital intercom, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the distant sound of the media crowd that had followed them here. "The thing about standing on your own feet," Claire finally said, "is that sometimes you need help to keep standing. You taught me that these past weeks. You and Hope, you showed me that independence doesn't mean isolation." Tom looked at Hope, then at Claire. "I'm not a charity case," he said quietly. "No," Claire agreed. "Your family, or at least you, could be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Hope chose that moment to sit up, looking between them, with what could only be described as feline exasperation. She headbutted Tom's hand, then Claire's, before settling between them again. "I think," Tom said slowly, Our little matchmaker has made her feelings clear. She's not the only one, Claire replied, squeezing his hand. So please let me help, not as a billionaire, not as Luna's owner, but as someone who... She paused, gathering courage. As someone who loves you. The monitors caught the slight jump in Tom's heart rate. Hope's purr grew louder, as if providing a soundtrack to the moment. Well, Tom finally said, his eyes twinkling despite his pallor, I suppose Sarah would say I'm being stubborn for no good reason. Sarah was a wise woman. She was. Tom looked at Hope, then back at Claire, and I think she'd like knowing that Hope brought us together. All of us. As if in response, Hope stretched contentedly between them, her presence a bridge between past and future, between loss and love, between two hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected way. Recovery came slowly, marked by small victories and quiet moments. Claire had transformed Tom's hospital room into a warm, homey space, complete with family photos and a small garden of potted plants on the windowsill. Against all hospital regulations, Hope remained a constant presence, hidden during rounds and emerging to provide her own brand of therapy once the medical staff departed. She's better than any medicine, Tom commented one afternoon, watching Hope delicately step around his IV. Lines to settle on his chest. The kitten had developed an uncanny sense for his pain levels, always choosing positions that provided comfort without causing discomfort. Claire had temporarily moved her office to the hospital room, managing her tech empire from a corner desk, while keeping watch over both Tom and Hope. Her presence had caused quite a stir among the hospital staff initially, but her genuine care for Tom had won them over. Your heart readings improve when she purrs, Claire noted, showing Tom the tracking app she'd developed to monitor his recovery. The vibration frequency seems to have therapeutic properties. I've got a research team looking into it. Tom smiled at her enthusiasm. Always the innovator, though I could have told you about the healing power of cat purrs without any fancy algorithms. The physical therapy sessions were the hardest. Tom's determination warred with his body's limitations, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. During these moments, Hope would perform her silliest antics, chasing her tail or rolling dramatically across the floor, until Tom couldn't help but laugh. She reminds me of my first-grade students, he said during a particularly challenging session. They always knew when to be serious and when to be ridiculous. Hope responded by flopping onto her back, paws waving in the air, drawing chuckles from both humans. Claire marveled at the change in herself during these weeks. Board meetings were handled via video calls, her usual power suits replaced by comfortable clothes suitable for hospital life. She found herself sharing stories of her day with Tom and Hope, their responses, both human and feline, becoming the highlight of her increasingly simple routine. Mrs. Chen organized a rotation of neighborhood visitors, each bringing home-cooked meals and updates about Tom's beloved garden. The roses miss you, she reported, but Claire's gardening app is keeping us all on schedule. The technology mogul had created a simple program to coordinate the community's care of Tom's plants, complete with Sarah's gardening wisdom incorporated into its advice. Late one night, as moonlight filtered through the hospital window, Claire found Tom awake and thoughtful. Hope dozed between them, her paw stretched out to touch each of their hands. Sarah and I never had children, Tom said quietly. Teaching was our way of having thousands of them in a way. But I always wondered if I'd missed something fundamental about life. Claire waited, sensing more to come. These past weeks, watching. You juggle running a global company with taking care of a stubborn old man and a determined cat. He smiled. It's shown me that family isn't about what you're born into or what you've missed. It's about what you choose to build. Hope shifted. In her sleep, her purr deepening as if agreeing. Claire found herself blinking back tears. The doctors say I can go home next week, Tom continued. I know you'll need to get back to your real life. This is my real life, Claire interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The rest is just work. Hope opened one eye, gave them both a satisfied look, then went back to sleep, her purr rumbling through the quiet room. "Besides," Claire added, her hand finding Tom's, "someone needs to make sure you follow doctor's orders. Between Hope's supervision and my monitoring apps, you don't stand a chance of being stubborn." Tom laughed softly, mindful of his healing chest. "Outnumbered by my two favorite girls." He squeezed her hand. "I suppose there are worse fates." Outside, the hospital windows, the city lights twinkled like stars. In the corner, Claire's laptop displayed stock prices and project updates, all seeming less urgent than the gentle rise and fall of Hope's breathing, the warm grip of Tom's hand, and the quiet certainty that sometimes life's greatest healing comes in unexpected packages. The day before Tom's discharge, Claire stood in his house, overseeing the modifications she'd arranged. The stairs now boasted a sturdy handrail, the bathroom had been fitted with safety features, and the garden had raised beds to minimize bending. Hope supervised the work from various vantage points, ensuring everything met her exacting standards. "Miss Montgomery," James appeared at her elbow, tablet in hand. "The board is demanding an in-person meeting. They're concerned about the company's direction." Claire watched Hope inspect the new garden setup, remembering Tom's words about choosing what matters. "Schedule it for next week. And James, start looking for a COO, someone who can handle day-to-day operations." "Are you sure that's wise?" His concern was evident. "The media speculation about your situation is already affecting stock prices." "Maybe it's time for different metrics of success," Claire replied, smiling as Hope approved the raised rosebed with a dignified headbutt. "Besides, the company's fundamentals are stronger than ever." The neighborhood had rallied around Tom's homecoming. Mrs. Chen organized a cleaning brigade, while her teenage grandson installed the health monitoring system Claire had designed. The local children made welcome home cards, each featuring careful drawings of Hope. In Tom's bedroom, Claire found herself lingering over photographs. Sarah's face smiled from many of them, her love for Tom evident in every captured moment. "I hope you'd approve," Claire whispered to one particularly beautiful shot of Sarah in the garden. "I'm not trying to replace you, I'm just talking to Sarah." Tom's voice came from the doorway, where he stood with his physical therapist after a preliminary home visit. Hope immediately trotted to his side, her unofficial position as therapy assistant taken very seriously. "I was just," Claire felt, unexpectedly shy, making sure she knows. Tom made his way to her side, one hand on his walker, the other reaching for hers. Sarah would have loved all this, especially how Hope brings everyone together. The physical therapist cleared her throat. "The house setup looks perfect, Mr. Anderson. Just remember to take things slowly at first." She smiled at Hope, "though I suspect you'll have strict supervision." After she left, Claire showed Tom the modifications. The kitchen had been subtly rearranged for easier access, his favorite chair fitted with a power lift, the garden tools adapted with ergonomic handles. Throughout the tour, Hope demonstrated each new feature as if she had personally designed them. "You've thought of everything," Tom said, sinking into his chair. Hope immediately claimed her spot on his lap, while Claire perched on the armrest. "Actually, I've been thinking—" Claire hesitated. "My penthouse is ridiculously large for one person, and this house has so many memories." Hope's ears perked up with interest. "Claire," Tom began carefully, "you don't have to—" "I want to," she interrupted. "Not moving in completely, not yet, but maybe a gradual transition. The guest room is lovely, and I could be here for your recovery." Hope stood up on Tom's lap, stretching to pat Claire's hand with her paw. "Well," Tom smiled, "it seems Hope has voted, and she's never wrong about important decisions. The next few hours were spent planning. Claire's architect would look at expanding the garden room into a home office. The kitchen would be updated to accommodate Claire's attempts at learning to cook. Most importantly, Hope's various beds and perches would remain exactly where she wanted them. As evening approached, Claire found herself in the garden, Hope helping her water Sarah's roses. The setting sun painted the sky in colors no artist could capture, while the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. "You know," Tom said from his chair on the porch, "Sarah always said gardens are like lives. They need room to grow, change, and bloom in unexpected ways." Claire looked at the house that was becoming her home, at the man who was becoming her future, and at the cat who had led her to both. The media would have a field day with her decision, the board would protest, her mother would be horrified. But watching Hope navigate proudly between her two favorite humans, Claire knew some things were worth more than public opinion. Spring arrived in a burst of color, transforming Tom's garden into a canvas of blooming flowers. 3 months had passed since his return home, and the changes went far beyond the seasonal. Claire had seamlessly woven herself into the fabric of their daily life, her corporate power suits now sharing closet space with gardening clothes. The media's initial frenzy over their unconventional arrangement had mellowed into occasional human interest stories. Tech billionaire finds joy in simple life had given way to more thoughtful pieces about intergenerational friendships and the healing power of pets. Hope, naturally, was the star of every photograph. One particular evening, as the sunset painted the garden in golden hues, Claire found Tom sitting in his favorite spot among the roses. Hope dozed nearby, her grey fur catching the last rays of sunlight. The scene was so peaceful, so perfect, that Claire's carefully planned speech caught. In her throat, "Sarah and I used to sit here in the evenings," Tom said, patting the bench beside him. "She'd tell me all her dreams for the garden, for our future. Even at 70, she never stopped dreaming." Claire sat down, Hope immediately stretching to place a paw on each of their laps. "Do you still dream, Tom?" His eyes crinkled with warmth. "More than ever, though my dreams have changed somewhat." He looked at her meaningfully. "They're filled with technology moguls who don't know how to make toast, and cats who think they run the household." "Hope does run the household," Claire corrected, earning an approving purr from their furry matchmaker. "The board wants me back in the city," she continued after a moment. "They've been patient, but they're worried about the company's image. My mother's been calling daily, insisting this rustic phase has gone on long enough." Tom nodded slowly. "And what do you want?" Claire reached into her pocket, pulling out a small box. "I want to rewrite the story." She opened it, revealing 2 simple gold bands. Not as a fairy tale about a young woman and an older man, or a billionaire and a teacher, but as a story about 2 people who found each other thanks to one very special cat. Hope sat up, her attention fully focused on the conversation. "The media will have a field day," Tom warned, though his eyes never left the rings. "The age difference is less significant than the difference in our stock portfolios, according to my mother." Claire smiled. "But none of that matters. What matters is that I love you, Thomas Anderson. You and Hope showed me what home really means." Tom took her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Are you sure? I'm not exactly a long-term investment." "Don't!" Claire's voice was firm. "Every day is a gift, whether we have 1 year or 30. Sarah taught you that, and now you've taught me." Hope chose this moment to stand up, placing one paw on their joined hands. Her purr rumbled through the evening air like a blessing. "Well," Tom said softly, "when Hope first arrived on my doorstep, I thought she was bringing me a reason to live. I never imagined she was bringing me a reason to love again." Claire slipped one of the rings onto his finger, and he did the same for her. They were simple bands, nothing like the elaborate jewelry Claire usually wore, but their significance made them more precious than any diamond. "Sarah would approve," Tom said confidently. "She always said love doesn't divide when you share it. It multiplies." As if to demonstrate this theorem, Hope distributed her affection equally between them, head-butting first one, then the other, before settling across both their laps in a bridge of grey fur. "So," Claire said, leaning her head on Tom's shoulder, "shall we tell the board they're getting a new chairman? One with 45 years of teaching experience and a talent for growing things?" Tom laughed, the sound mixing with Hope's purrs in the garden's peaceful atmosphere. I can just imagine their faces. Though I suppose if you can teach a tech billionaire to appreciate garden herbs, I can learn about corporate governance. We'll learn together, Claire promised. All three of us. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the house behind them, lights glowed warmly in windows that no longer held any loneliness. And between them, a small grey cat with a fancy collar purred contentedly, knowing her work of bringing two hearts together was finally complete. The wedding was nothing like the society pages had predicted. Instead of a lavish ceremony at a five-star hotel, Claire and Tom chose to marry in their garden, surrounded by blooming roses and their closest friends. Hope, wearing a tiny flower crown that matched Claire's bouquet, took her role as ring-bearer seriously, delivering the banns with perfect feline dignity. Mrs. Chen had rallied the neighborhood into action. Children scattered rose petals along garden paths, while their parents strung fairy lights through the trees. Tom's former students, now adults with their own families, came from across the country to celebrate their beloved teacher's happiness. Claire's corporate world and Tom's community merged seamlessly. Tech executives in designer suits mingled with local gardening club members, sharing stories about the unlikely couple. James, who had finally relaxed his professional demeanor, was seen getting gardening tips from Mrs. Chen. "I still can't believe you're wearing jeans to your own wedding," Claire's mother whispered, though her criticism had lost its edge over the months. She had finally succumbed to Hope's charms, the kitten having worked her magic during family dinners. "The designer jeans," Claire replied with a wink, adjusting Tom's matching denim jacket. They had chosen comfort over convention, their attire reflecting their shared new life rather than their separate past ones. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Tom and Claire had written their own vows, each including a special promise to Hope, who sat between them throughout the service. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when Tom spoke about second chances and the unexpected ways love finds us. "Sarah once told me that love is like a garden," Tom said, his voice strong and clear. "It needs daily tending, room to grow, and sometimes a little divine intervention." He smiled at Hope. "Or feline intervention, as the case may be." Claire's tech empire had adapted to their new reality. Board meetings now alternated between the city and their expanded garden room, with Hope often making appearances on video calls. Tom's experience in education had brought a fresh perspective to the company's philanthropic initiatives, leading to innovative programs combining technology and teaching. The garden had evolved too. Claire's apps helped maintain Sarah's original vision while incorporating new elements. A special section was dedicated to cat-friendly plants, which Hope supervised with professional interest. The raised beds Tom had initially needed for his recovery had become a model for accessible gardening, attracting visitors from surrounding communities. "You know what the best part is?" Tom asked as they swayed to their first dance, fairy lights twinkling above them. "Every day I get to fall in love all over again." He glanced at Hope, who was accepting congratulatory pats from guests. "With both of you." The media had finally found an angle they couldn't resist. The triumph of love over convention, the blend of old wisdom and new vision, and, of course, the cat who made it all possible. Hope's Instagram account, managed by Claire's PR team, had millions of followers who tuned in daily for updates on the unusual family. As evening fell on their wedding day, the garden filled with music and laughter. Former students shared stories about Mr. Anderson's teaching days, while tech entrepreneurs discussed the future of education. In the midst of it all, Hope moved from group to group, ensuring everyone felt included in her extended family. Claire's mother was overheard telling her friends, "Well, I suppose there are worse things than having a son-in-law who can make roses bloom in winter." She had even begun participating in Mrs. Chen's weekly dinner deliveries, though her contributions tended to come from high-end restaurants. The neighborhood children had created a special wedding gift, a book of drawings featuring Hope's tale of bringing Claire and Tom together. The story, told from the cat's perspective, captured the magic of their journey perfectly. As the celebration continued around them, Claire and Tom found a quiet moment on their favorite garden bench. Hope jumped up between them, assuming her usual position of connecting them both. "Ready for our next chapter?" Claire asked, squeezing Tom's hand. "With my two best girls by my side?" Tom smiled, scratching Hope's favorite spot. "I can't wait to see what other miracles are in store." 1 year later, the garden bloomed more vibrantly than ever. Sarah's roses now shared space with innovative hydroponic systems, a blend of traditional gardening and modern technology that had become a symbol of Tom and Claire's unique partnership. Hope surveyed her domain from a custom-built cat tree that offered strategic views of both the garden and her beloved humans. Their story had inspired changes far beyond their own lives. Claire's company had launched an initiative combining tech, education with community gardening, starting in schools across the country. Tom's expertise guided the program, his years of teaching experience shaping how technology could enhance rather than replace traditional learning. The guest room had become Claire's permanent bedroom months ago, though she still kept the penthouse for late work nights. More often than not, however, business came to them. Board members had grown accustomed to conducting meetings with Hope in attendance, her presence somehow making corporate decisions feel more humane. Mrs. Chen still brought extra portions of dinner, now coordinating with Claire's mother in an unlikely but devoted friendship. The two women had bonded over their shared mission of ensuring Tom took proper care of himself, their concern wrapped in love and weekly casseroles. "Life has a way of surprising you," Tom mused one evening as they sat in their favorite spot. Hope dozed between them, her collar, still the original one from that stormy night, catching the last rays of sunset. "A year ago, I thought I was meant to live quietly with my memories. Now look at us." Claire leaned against his shoulder, her tablet forgotten beside her. On it, stock prices and project updates waited, but they no longer commanded her constant attention. Sometimes the best things in life come from a cat showing up on your doorstep. Hope opened one eye at this, her expression somehow both proud and modest. She had maintained her perfect balance of affection between them, though she still claimed Tom's lap as her favorite spot during story time. The neighborhood children still came by for gardening lessons, now learning from both Tom's experience and Claire's tech innovations. The garden had become a living classroom where tradition and progress grew together in harmony. "Sarah would love what this place has become," Tom said softly, watching a butterfly land on one of her roses. "A home, a school, a gathering place, and most of all filled with love." Claire squeezed his hand, feeling the simple gold band that matched her own. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." Hope stood up then, stretching luxuriously before settling back down across both their laps, a bridge of soft grey fur, connecting past and present, wisdom and innovation, two hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected way. Above them, the first stars began to appear, twinkling like the fairy lights that had illuminated their wedding. The garden lay peaceful around them, Sarah's roses releasing their evening fragrance, and in that moment, as it had been since a stormy night brought them together, love bloomed as naturally as flowers in spring.